Okay, welcome to video 6 of this course. This is on evaluating arguments. So chapter 1 introduced the idea of an argument and taught you how to put them in standard form. And now I want to talk about evaluating them, deciding whether or not they're good arguments. And that's what's going on in chapter 2, which you will also be reading for this week. So basically, there are two separate ways an argument can go wrong. And a lot of what we are doing from here on out is just keeping these two ideas separate. Basically, when you encounter an argument, you need to do two things. You need to check the reasons. Are the premises true? That's one way an argument can go wrong. It can have a false premise. Consider an argument from the beginning of 12 Angry Men. Juror 6, the painter, says, well, what really got me was that he had a motive, right? So the argument is just, the boy had a motive, therefore the boy is probably guilty, more likely to be guilty, that sort of thing. So it could be that statement is simply false. The boy didn't have a motive. Maybe all the testimony that said he fought with his father was false, and actually they loved each other deeply. That's one way the argument can go wrong. Another way is that the premises are true, but they don't really support the conclusion. And that's pretty much true of the motive argument if you take it just on its own. Simply having a motive to commit the murder, even if he really did have the motive, is not enough to, it's not sufficient evidence by any standard to show that he committed the crime. So this is a thing that you need to make a habit. It's just a basic element of being a critical thinker, is to always do these two things. Always ask yourself, are the premises true? And if the premises were true, would they support the conclusion? Another basic thing that any critical thinker has to do is remember to separate the conclusion from the argument. You may think the boy is innocent, but think that some of the arguments that Juror 8 uses to show that the boy is innocent are bad arguments. Actually, I think that. We'll talk about that in the last bit of the movie. Nevertheless, so you need to remember that you're not evaluating the truth of the premise. You're not evaluating the truth of the conclusion when you evaluate an argument. You're evaluating the truth of the premises, and you're evaluating the quality of the inference from the premises to the conclusion. All right. So when we talk about arguments, classically, people have gone looking for the very best arguments. This is mostly a bit of the history of European philosophy. And they came up with this word to describe the strongest arguments, valid. And because we want to distinguish the truth of the premises from the strength of the inference, we need to distinguish valid from sound. So these are two separate terms we use to evaluate arguments. We're going to say that an argument is valid if it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. That's an odd phrase, but you need to just sit with it a while and really get it down. We're not claiming that the premises are true. We're just saying that if they were true, there's absolutely no way the conclusion could be false. And then if it turns out that the premises actually are true, that's a bonus, and we say that the argument is sound. So when you check the reasoning, if the reasoning is perfect, absolutely perfect, we say that the argument is valid. If after that you check the reasons and you find that they are true, then the argument is sound. All right, remember this slide from a video last week? We defined an inference as the connection between statements in an argument. So when you move from the premises to the conclusion of an argument, you are making an inference, right? The connection between premises and conclusions is the inference. So when we say that an argument is valid, what we mean is that the inference, that connection, is perfect. So it's about the arrow. When we say that an argument is sound, we say that it's valid and, go back, the premises, here just premise 1, premise 2, they are true. Okay? So here is one of the standard examples of a valid argument. All people are mortal. Socrates is a person. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Right? If those two premises are true, there is no way for the conclusion to be false. Also, it's sound because we know those two premises are true. Now, think about this one. This argument is also valid. All people are carrots. Socrates is a person. Therefore, Socrates is a carrot. So this is an argument that is valid, just as valid as the last argument, but it's not sound anymore. So again, an argument is valid if it's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. It's about the relationship between the premises and the conclusion, right? So there's one possibility that's being ruled out here. True premises, false conclusion. We're ruling that out. So look at these two examples again. In the first example, we have true premises and a true conclusion. In the second example, we have false premises, one false premise, that all people are carrots, and a false conclusion. Neither of those are ruled out by the definition of a valid argument, which just says the premises can't be true and the conclusion false. So both of these, that's one reason why both of these count as valid. This, on the other hand, is an invalid argument. All people are mortal. Socrates is mortal. Therefore, all people are Socrates. Right? Now you've got, we just rearranged the premises and the conclusion, and, or actually we just rearranged some of the terms in the conclusion, and now we get two true premises and a false conclusion. And so that is obviously the definition of an invalid argument. But now consider this. All dogs are mammals. All domesticated canines are mammals. Therefore, all dogs are domesticated canines. Think about that for a second. Is that valid? It already says on the top it's invalid. It's not valid. All these statements are true, but the way the argument is structured, the premises could be true and the conclusion false. And the way to see that is to substitute in different terms. So, I see what's going on here. So, even though all the premises are true, they actually don't provide support for the conclusion. And we can see this by substituting cats for domesticated canines. Right? All dogs are mammals. All cats are mammals. Therefore, all dogs are cats. Suddenly, we have the same argument, same argument structure, but true premises and a false conclusion. So with this argument, when you look at it as this structure, you can see that it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false, and therefore the argument is invalid. All right. Validity is a very special kind of compliment that you can pay an argument. It's the highest possible compliment you can pay an argument. And in the real world, most arguments aren't even trying to be valid. There are only a few contexts where we really encounter valid arguments. And these mostly have to do with kind of arbitrary systems or systems that might be viewed as arbitrary. Well, okay. Grammatical rules, logical rules, legal codes, mathematics, logical games, and puzzles. All of these are situations where we just pretend like our definitions are incredibly rigid. So if you want to know a mathematical statement, you can reason to the truth of that statement with validity. 2 + 2 = 4 can be proven from other premises with validity. Well, there's more complicated. Math, pure math, not math tied to the messy physical world, but the idea of pure number, this is a realm where validity is possible. Also, if we've got truths that we accept so naturally that they seem like mathematical truths, then we can go ahead and say that. So arguments with premises like all people are mortal, or unsupported objects near the earth are pulled toward the center of the earth, those all statements there are universal enough that we can say that there's a valid argument that's possible. Valid arguments are also possible in hypothetical situations if we just imagine that we've got a perfectly verified truth. So we can say, all humans have purple hair and 5 legs, or all people are carrots. As long as we're imagining that these universalizations are as true as 2 + 2 = 4, then we can make validity possible. But most of the time, arguments aren't even trying to be valid. So I'm going to do one from the homework. The way I've got the course set up this semester, you're doing the homework after the video, so I'm giving you an answer. But let's just check this out. A forest ranger is surveying a park, and he says, I can tell that bears have been down by the river because there are tracks in the mud. And tracks like these are made by bears in almost every case. So now remember, with the conventions that we have set up for this course, the part in italics at the beginning represents context. And a lot of times context won't matter, but sometimes it does. And I like keeping that there to emphasize the idea of context. Arguments occur in context. So this argument, this is an argument. And you can tell it's an argument because it has an indicator word. It's got this because. Right? And that means that the first statement is the conclusion. I can tell that bears have been down by the river. We're going to drop out, when we put this in standard form, we're going to drop out the I can tell that, and we're just worried about this proposition that's about the world. We're not worried about the thinker. So we say, bears have been down by the river. We'll draw a line above it. That's our conclusion. And that means that the other two statements are premises. There are tracks in the mud, and tracks like these are made in almost every case. Oh, but wait, there's that word almost. That means this argument is invalid. Nevertheless, it looks like it's a pretty good argument. So now we're going to have to talk about a different kind of compliment that we can pay arguments. An argument is valid if where the conclusion must be true if the premises are true. On the other hand, an argument is strong if the conclusion is likely to be true if the premises are true. So this is anything less than deductive validity. Validity is our highest standard. Deductive validity is our highest standard. Anything less than that is merely a strong argument. So one interesting thing about strong arguments is that it actually comes in degrees. How strong is strong? Validity is a black and white property. Arguments are either valid or they're not. Strength comes in degrees. How strong does an argument need to be before it's strong enough? Well, in the case that, in the example from 12 Angry Men, the argument has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. That's less than validity. It's not mathematics. At one point, Henry Fonda says, we're all just gambling on probabilities here. And that's right. That's what it's like when you're dealing with the empirical world rather than the world of pure mathematics. Okay. So, an argument can be strong. We now have three terms. Valid, sound, strong. And then we want to introduce another word, cogent. And then cogent is the equivalent of sound for arguments that are strong. So an argument is strong if the premises would make the conclusion likely if they were true. And then an argument is cogent if it is strong and the premises are true. So check the reasoning. The reasoning is good enough. We call it strong. What counts as good enough? That's going to depend on the context. And in the case of a jury, you use the standard of a reasonable doubt. That's because it's a criminal trial with the defendant's life on the line. In a civil trial with a lawsuit, there are other standards like the preponderance of evidence. We'll talk about that when we get to burden of proof. In any case, we just say an argument is strong if the reasoning is good enough, and we say that the argument is cogent if it is strong and the reasons are true. So this is the full array of complements you can pay an argument. Valid, sound, strong, cogent. You need to know these terms. Okay. The difference between the world of valid arguments and the world of strong arguments also gets a name. We talk about the difference between deductive arguments and inductive arguments. Mathematics is generally pursued as a deductive science. And that's because the proofs of mathematics are supposed to be valid. Anything about the physical world, the empirical world around us, the world that we can sense, is going to be inductive. Arguments about that merely aim at strength. So Sherlock Holmes, in I think most of the instantiations going all the way back to the original, will say that that it's deduction, Watson. It's elementary. He's actually not doing deduction there. He's doing induction because it's about the physical world. So we put our terms together like this. The realm of deduction, if you're in the realm of deduction, things are valid or sound. If you're in the realm of induction, things are strong or cogent. All right. So here's an example of a valid argument. Start with a hypothetical statement. If the deficit goes up, then deficits will rise. Then interest rates will rise. Deficits are going up, therefore interest rates will rise. If If you imagine that first statement is a perfectly verified if-then statement, then the argument is valid. It's if A, then B, A, therefore B. That is a structure that is always true. Here's an example of a strong argument. I have seen 1,000,000 swans. They all are white. Therefore, all swans are white. This has been an example of an induction for the longest time because in Europe, all the swans are white. And so when a European, a Dutch guy, I think, finally got to Australia and saw a black swan, that was, you had like hundreds of years of this generalization. All swans are white. Of course they're white. And that generalization becomes false when you travel to Australia from the European perspective. So that kind of generalization about the physical world can be changed by more experience with the physical world. So here's another example of a valid argument. If the moon were made of green cheese, mice would love it there. The moon is made of cheese, therefore mice love it there. Now we've got a false premise, but it's got the same structure as the first argument, actually. And it's a valid structure. If A, then B, A, therefore B. Okay. So look at this argument. Do you think it's valid? Premise 1. If roses were green, money would grow on trees. It's an if-then statement. Premise 2. Roses are green. Conclusion, money grows on trees. It's valid. It's the same structure that we saw before. All right, I'm going to leave you with one final argument. This one is cogent. The sun has risen every morning for as long as anyone can remember. Therefore, the sun will probably rise tomorrow. You may think of the sun will come up tomorrow as as an absolute certainty. But by the standards that gave us mathematical validity, it's not a certainty. It is merely the best we can do with inductive reasoning. And that's because all of inductive reasoning depends on a single premise, that the future will be like the past, at least a little, right? And whenever you're working off of the idea that the future will be like the past, you're dealing with inductive reasoning. All right, so after this, you go back to 12 Angry Men. We're going to take a look at more inductive reasoning about actually a physical event, whether or not a boy stabbed his father.